Hi kids, my name is Neil McDonnell and I work at Isabella Bank, and I've been asked to read a story to you, a story about Curious George. Curious George is one of my favorite books that I used to read as a kid, and I'm really glad to share this book with you. And the story of this is Curious George Saves His Pennies. So let's read along here. George was a good little monkey, and was always very curious, especially when he was at Tommy's toy store. There were so many things to wonder about: pogo sticks and skateboards, snow globes and kaleidoscopes, and even finger traps. But George's favorite thing to do in the store was to play at the train table. Today there was a new train. Its wood was painted bright red and had a real working whistle. You know this guy with the man with the yellow hat, I'm sure. George held it up to his friend, the man with the yellow hat, and he said, "Not today. I'm looking for a birthday present for Noah. You remember? He's turning 5. What do you think of this?" George helped his friend pick out the yellow and green hula hoop. While Tommy the storekeeper wrapped the present for the birthday party, George went back to the train table. He was checking out that red train you see there at the bottom. "I have a suggestion, George," said the man as he carried the gift over. "Why don't you buy that train yourself? The tag says $5. I'm sure you could save the money for it." George liked this suggestion so much that he was only a little sorry to put the train back on the table. George had a good time at the birthday party. Noah let everyone use the hula hoop. It was harder than it looked. You see George's hat falling off his head there at the birthday party. George dreamed about his red train that night. He was riding it through a forest of trees. He turned on the whistle again and again so that no one could miss such a shiny red train. In the morning, George decided he would have to find a way to earn money first, earn money faster. What if someone else were to buy the red train at the toy store before he could? He had an idea. George found 5 pennies and a dime in the sofa cushions. You can see him doing that right here. He found a nickel under his bed. His piggy bank jingled nicely that evening. He had 75 cents saved. One more quarter and he would have $1. The next morning, George had another idea. He would get a job. Lucky for George, his neighbor, Mr. Reddy, needed help raking leaves. George worked all morning long, gathering arms full of red, brown, and gold leaves to add to the growing pile in the center of his yard. Mr. Reddy brought out lemonade for the two of them to share. While his neighbor rested on the sun porch swing, George climbed the tree. The pile of leaves looked tempting from above. George wondered what would happen if. Boom, he jumped out of the tree into the leaves. Before he finished wondering, he swung out of the branches of the tree and right into the center of the pile. The leaves crunched and crumbled and swooshed and swirled. What an adventure. At the end of the week, George had $5. Oops. Oh, I skipped a page, sorry. What hard work it was raking up the leaves back up into a pile. But at the end of the day, Mr. Reddy paid him $2. George had $2.75 saved. That was almost $3. George spent many days doing odd jobs. He washed windows, he distributed flyers, and delivered flowers, and he also did dishes. At the end of the week, George finally had $5. "I'm proud of you, George," said the man with the yellow hat. "You saved all that money by yourself. You sure earned that train." Down below. below here. The change jingled merrily in the piggy bank as George set off for the toy store. The autumn day was bright and clear and not very cold. George walked by the park. The neighborhood children were playing with a windsock. Suddenly it got stuck on the tree. They needed George's help. George carefully set his piggy bank down on the nearby park bench, where he could keep an eye on it. And as George began to play with the children, he forgot to check that his bank was still there. As the afternoon wore on, his friends went home to have dinner. George rushed to the park bench where he had left his piggy bank. The toy store may be closing soon, but his bank was gone. Maybe George had the wrong bench. There were so many in the park after all, but he was disappointed each time he ran up to another empty bench. George walked home sadly. He wondered how long it would take him to save $5 again. As George passed the toy store, he happened to look through the window. He couldn't believe his eyes. A little girl was holding his piggy bank. You can see that right here. George ran into the toy store just as the girl's mother was saying, "We found this across the street and waited for its owner, but it's getting late. We saw it has the name of your store in the bottom. Can you keep it in case the owner comes by to claim it?" George jumped up and down on the counter. "Why, George," Tammy said, "is this piggy bank yours? You're lucky Hannah and her mother found it." Hugging his piggy bank tightly, George rushed over to the train section. He located a shiny red engine right away. He carried it to the counter. The little girl looked at his train shyly. George realized he had not said thank you for her keeping his savings safe. He looked for his train. He looked for his piggy bank. He looked for Hannah. Good deeds deserve to be rewarded, he decided. George set the train down. He upended his bank on the counter and began to sort dollars and coins. George and Hannah walked out of the toy store that day, each carrying a train. George's small engine was not red, but it was shiny and blue, and he had paid for it all by himself. Best of all, he had a new friend who loved to play with trains almost as much as he did. Well, this is a great little story, I think, of wanting something so much that you work hard to save money to get what you want. So it's kind of a nice little story of hard work pays off. So hopefully you enjoyed the story today. Curious George Saves His Pennies.